Welcome back, and what we're going to talk about today are the 10 worst pieces of gear that I've ever owned, including guitars, amps, and effects. On that note, we're going to go ahead and get started. Now, like I said, these are the 10 worst pieces of gear I've ever owned, including guitars, amps, and effects. And these are in no particular order. They all sucked equally bad. Now, which means that number 10 is not the best of the suck, and number 1 being the worst of the suck. They just all sucked. Now, this guitar, I actually did a video on this guitar probably 3 years ago, if probably longer than that, to be honest with you. And this guitar was absolutely pathetic. It was one of the worst guitars I've ever owned in my life. And if you've watched my channel, you know how much I love the EVH guitars, especially the PV brand EVH guitars. This one came to me from Sweetwater, believe it or not. And I was stunned that when I pulled it out of the box, all 4 screws on the back that hold the neck on were not even finger tight. And 2 of them were actually sticking out, which means that neck, the head, if it's attached here at the body, that head was probably moving this far on each side. I mean, it was literally like this. It was insane. I cannot believe this guitar got sent to me. And I thought, okay, as long as it doesn't have a shim in the neck and the shim slipped out, not a big deal. But lo and behold, when I put the guitar, the neck back in line, one thing I noticed immediately, and I've said this before on a video where I was talking about playing the Japanese EVH, which I was so looking forward to. I was dead set on buying that guitar. And I got a chance to play a brand new one, and lo and behold, the high E string was literally right against the edge of the fretboard, which is completely unacceptable if you're a guitar player. Well, this Mexican Strat, this EVH Special that I had, same exact problem. Once I realigned the neck, the high E was right against the fretboard, which is completely unacceptable. Now, I did have somebody say, why didn't you just tilt the neck up? Because that's not how it works. Yes, I could have tilted the neck up, and yes, it would have pulled the high E up off of the bottom, but then everything would not have been in line. It'd have been, virtually nearly impossible to keep a perfect intonation on that guitar had I done that. So obviously, I did what anybody with a brain should do, is I boxed it back up, sent it back to Sweetwater, and put in a phone call. And, I can't believe that you guys actually sent me this guitar. I was kind of shocked that I got it in that kind of condition. So that was number 10, the EVH Striped Wolfgang. Now, this is without a doubt one of the pieces of gear I was the most excited about, which ended up being one of my biggest disappointments. There's 2 on here that are particularly disappointing to me, and one of them was this TC Electronics G system. I had seen a couple of guys playing this, and I just thought, you know what? This thing is awesome. It solves all my problems. I can get rid of the bulk of my pedals in one fell swoop. I have everything contained in this massive tank-looking unit. It looks cool. It's going to look cool on stage. It's going to look cool under my feet. Couldn't wait to get it hooked up. So I ran the 4-wire system on it, and I instantly hooked it up to my Marshall JVM that I was gigging through at the time. And lo and behold, as soon as I clicked it on, unbelievable amount of noise came out of this unit. I was stunned at how bad it was. And even when I ran my noise gate, I would have to basically run a noise gate between that TC Electronics and the amp to quiet it down. And the bad thing about it is when I turned on the chorus, it would go noise would. And it was completely unacceptable because, as guitar players, high gain amps are going to be noisy. Well, I don't need anything adding noise into the signal chain. So therefore, it instantly had to go. I had a very nice gate at that point. It was a racked effect gate. And it was freaking awesome. And it absolutely contained my guitar 100%. But I got to tell you, man, that TC Electronics, I was so shocked at how much noise that unit actually put out. And I just could not quell it down. The other thing that disappointed me about it is the reverbs were not great. They were reverby, but it just sounded like a digital reverb. And granted, it was digital, obviously, but it just had kind of a harsh sound to it. I could never get that really lush, soft reverb out of it. The delays were pretty good for what delays are. The chorus never sounded analog at all because, that's one thing we kind of want as guitar players is we want a good analog chorus sound. because, as great as digital effects are, analog effects are, that's the end all be all. Now I play through a fractal, of course, and what do we do on fractals? We try to emulate the tube amps because that's the end all be all. And this way we can carry a lot of amps around without having to lug around, 4,000 pounds of amplifiers. So I was really kind of disappointed in this. Like I said, the thing was absolutely built like a tank, had these massive buttons on it. You could literally punish this thing during a show and it would hold up. But because of the noise and because of the sterility of the sounds of the effects, it had to go. I actually bought a Rocktron Piranha, and what it is a tube preamp, and I was running that, which I should have kept this. This is one of the pieces of gear I never should have sold. I had a 50/50 stereo tube amplifier from Mesa Boogie. It was rack mount. That thing was freaking awesome. Never should have got rid of that, and of course, like a moron, I did. But I was running, I bought a Rocktron Piranha. I guess it was Rocktron's answer to the MP, and it just never really, I couldn't get it ever dialed in. Now, it had a great distortion sound. It was its own sound. It wasn't trying to model anything in particular. It wasn't trying to sound like a Mesa Boogie or whatever it was. It had its own Rocktron flavor, which actually the distortion on it was very, very good. And the tone, had I been able to get it dialed in, I could already tell that it would have been very, very good. Now, this was geared more towards rock and roll, metal, etc. But the problem I had with it is the EQ was fairly good for the treble and the bass. But for the mid, it was absolutely pathetic. And you could never hit that sweet spot on the mids. And it's like everything from 12 up was just crazy MIDI. I mean, it just sounded like you were playing in a box. And as you started rolling it down, when you'd go, it would barely change the EQ of the mids. I mean, it was minimal. And then right when it hit 9, it was a complete scoop, which means it sounds great, but the downside of that is you're 100% lost in the mix. So what you got to do is you got to start turning up your treble, and then you got to start cranking your amp louder to get more volume. And that is never the answer. Going louder is never the answer when you're in that situation. And then it kind of got to the point because of where I was having to boost the treble and all that to get some kind of cut on it. It was just starting to become, very unpleasing to the ear. And it didn't matter how much I tweaked on that thing. I could not find that sweet spot in the mid-range, and therefore it would become unusable. Now, I probably could have cracked it open, pulled the potentiometer out, and done a little work on it, and probably got it better. But at this point, I didn't want to mess with it. I just wanted to get something I could dial in and move on with my band without constantly having to sit and fiddle and tweak, trying to find that one perfect spot. Because as you know, no matter what your general settings are, as you go from venue to venue to venue, that very well may change. Some rooms could be very bright. Some rooms could be very bassy. And so you got to go in there and change your EQ. And when you have an EQ that literally there's no play in the mid on the Rocktron. It was basically a switch. It was either off or on. It was either a whole bunch of mids and varying degrees of a whole bunch of mids or none. There was no in between. So that was number 8, and needless to say, that went up for sale, and it was gone. Now, this is something that I thought this was going to be very cool. What it is, it's a wireless pedal that you put on your pedal board, and I thought this is going to be absolutely awesome. I've already got wires going back there anyway. I've already got cables running back, so, it's not a big deal because the way I ran my pedal board, I ran everything through my effects loop. My pedal board was split. I ran all my ambient effects. I ran all those pre. And then I ran all my effects that moved, my choruses and all that stuff, all my modulation. I ran all that post. So I already had cables going back. And I thought, well, it's just one more cable going back because it runs, it's on your pedal board and it's for your wireless. So your wireless goes to that and it comes out to the amp. So you run it to the front end of the amp. And of course, through all your pedals, so on and so on and so on, into that, and then it goes back. And I thought, well, it's not a big deal. This will be great. And I'll have it right here. I should have great connection all the time. Everything should work. So it's always going to be right close to where I stand, mostly because of my pedals. And lo and behold, this thing was not good. It was very low end. It was a very cheap unit. It was pretty cool how it worked. And I really liked it because I liked having it right there so I could just click it. If I needed to do a quick mute on my guitar, I could just click it and it just shut my guitar off. And I absolutely love that. And, of course, the one I got now is a rack mount wireless, and I don't have that option anymore. But since I got a fractal, I have that option programmed into my foot controller that I can just go in and just mute my guitar. So, But the problem is even with that unit, as close as I would be, I would still have dropouts on it from time to time. I didn't have a ton of dropouts, but I did have some, and it seemed like the more congested, noisier area I was in, the more dropouts that I would have. And as you know, as a guitar player, completely unacceptable, completely unacceptable. But the bad side is about 3-4 months into it, completely stopped working. Didn't matter what I did, it would turn on. Everything would turn on, and the transmitter and the receiver would connect. It just wouldn't send any sound out whatsoever. And, and I thought, this is obviously unacceptable. It doesn't work. Now, luckily, I did get this at Sweetwater. And what I said about Sweetwater earlier about the EVH guitar, that was not me dogging Sweetwater. I was surprised with all their inspections that they do, that guitar got out and got to me in that horrible of a shape. I was absolutely shocked that came from Sweetwater. But I have spent a ton of money at Sweetwater. And real quick, just, this is not sponsored by Sweetwater. I don't want their sponsors. I don't want anything from Sweetwater. This is, but I do a lot of business with Sweetwater. And I have my own specific sales guy up there that I buy, everything through this one particular guy. And I have spent tens of thousands of dollars there. And I'm not exaggerating. I mean, I bought keyboards, pianos, guitars, you name it. My Kemper came from there. And so luckily, since I've done so much business there, they did agree to take that back and let me trade it in on the wireless I have now, which is another Shure, but it is a more professional unit, which has been absolutely flawless. Absolutely brilliant. And if anybody wants more information about that or review on that unit, let me know and I will do that. But that GLX 16, not worth the money. I thought that was just I thought it was a great concept, absolutely horrible pedal. That's all I can say. It just was not worth, the execution of that was terrible. And so if you have one of those and it works, good for you. Mine didn't. Mine failed and it let me down in, all kinds of ways. So there it went. Now, before anybody jumps on my back, before I start telling you how much the Helix sucks, I bought the Helix when it first came out. Now, what had happened is I was done with amps. I love my tube amps, and the last the amp I loved the best was actually I had a Randall RM100, and that is basically what Synergy is today. That used to be the Randall RM100, and it was just amazing, absolutely amazing amp. And but it got to the point where I was just carrying too much gear. Because I had a full stack amp, I had a 100-pound freaking digital stage piano, I had a 24-channel analog Yamaha board, which is the size of the freaking Titanic, plus a full PA that I was carrying to all the shows, while my sorry-ass bass player basically carried his amp and his guitar, my sorry-ass rhythm guitar player carried his amp and his guitar, and my sorry-ass drummer carried what few drums that he had. I carried everything else, and I got tired of it. So I thought, you know what, I'm paring this shit down. So I ended up getting rid of the Randall, and then I bought another amp, which will be on this list next. And then when I got rid of that amp, the one after the Randall, I ended up buying the Line 6 Helix. Because I thought, I just want to make it simple. I want a simple, light rig because I'm tired of spending, an hour and 20 minutes, hour and 30 minutes setting up my stage. So I ended up getting the Helix. And I got to tell you, man, that was, the pedal itself is absolutely gorgeous. The buttons were very cool on it, had the big displays, everything was nice and color-coded, and I love that about it. What I could not get was I couldn't even get a half-ass decent distortion out of it. Everything I tried sounded 1,000% sterile digital noise. Now, the cleans, I get brilliant cleans out of it, absolutely fantastic, and the effects on it aren't that bad. They're not great. They're not that bad. Now, I do understand that since then, that was a few years ago, so I do understand that since then, there's been a lot of updates and a lot of changes in IRs and all that stuff, and there's people who use the Helix and they love it, and I get that. But I bought it when it first came out, and I thought it was an absolute terrible piece of gear and was not worth the money, not even close to what I paid for it. And I'm not dogging Line 6, because before I went through my big amp phase, I always played with combo amps, little combo amps. And then I actually ended up buying a Line 6 Pod Pro. If you remember the Bean Line 6 is the red one. Well, I had the big rack mount version of that. And at the time, it was pretty cool. It actually didn't sound that bad. Now, granted, it was very, the effects were very mediocre on it. The distortions actually were not that bad. The clean channels are pretty good. And I had the controller, and I could control everything through there. And played with that for a while, and then that went through my amp phase, which was just an absolute nightmare. And I thought, well, the Pod Pro wasn't that bad. Maybe this Helix won't be that bad. And I was wrong. To me, the Helix was garbage. It was absolutely terrible. But remember now, this is when it first came out. I know a lot of things have happened since then, but the problem is there's other products on the market that even today are still significantly better than the Helix. So needless to say, the Helix, it went away. Now, this is the last amp I actually owned. When I got rid of my Randall RM100 stack, which was a brilliant amp, absolutely love that amp. I just did not want to carry around that, 120-pound head anymore. That was 100 watts, much louder than you'll ever need. And then, two 4x12 cabs. And then I started using it with a 1 4x12 cab, and it was still just too damn much. So I ended up paring it down, and I went with the H&K Tube Meister 40 Deluxe. And I love H&K amps. Now, I've played a Triamp, and an H&K Triamp is absolutely brilliant. It is a brilliant amp. If you're not familiar with that amp, it has 6L6 and EL34 tubes in it, and you can get very distinctive different sounds. It's very similar to a Mesa Boogie Road King, which is also another brilliant amp that, if you find one now, just get ready to sell, your first child to pay for it, especially a Road King 2. And but the problem with it is, that's a $4,300. I think it's $4,300 for that head, just for the head alone. And then by the time you get through adding your effects, you add a cab, everything. Well, you're back to a $10,000 setup, and it's just not worth it for playing clubs. For what for the kind of playing that we do, it just wasn't worth it. And so I ended up getting the H&K, the Tube Meister, and upon reading about it, and the problem I have is I live in Knoxville, Tennessee, and if there's a piece of gear here you see that you want to play, tough shit, not going to happen. You're going to have to order it and test it out for yourself. Because you would think with Nashville being right next door to me, I would have access to just about any piece of gear that I wanted to test out. But that is not so here in Knoxville, Tennessee. If I want to try out gear, I literally have to get in my car and drive 2.5 hours to Nashville to check it out. But a lot of times, even in Nashville, I can't find what I'm looking for. So with that being said, I went ahead and ordered the H&K Tube Meister. And there again, I ordered that from Sweetwater many, many years ago. And very disappointed. The concept is absolutely brilliant. It is a beautiful lamp. It lights up blue, absolutely gorgeous. It's all tube, and it has fully programmable. It's fully MIDI programmable, and that's the one thing that I really liked about my Marshall JVM. It was fully MIDI programmable, and so I didn't, I could have multiple tones out of a tube amp, just like I can on this one on the H&K. And in my mind, it was hell. It's a much smaller version of a JVM. And, with the little 2x12 cab and the little bitty head, little 40-watt head, but which was I could attenuate the head. So I could take it from 40 watts, down to 5 watts, 1 watt, whatever it is. And so that means I could get the tubes on full boil. I could crank that master up and just get those tubes smoking hot. And it did have some built-in effects on it with its own built-in noise gate. Now, the effects, again, they were okay. They weren't, stellar studio level effects. The noise gate was superb. It was absolutely fantastic. But the problem is that, it has to be, I'm sure it's the wiring design of the amp. It comes with the EL34s, which I'm not a big fan of. For clean channels, clean sounds, EL34s are absolutely fantastic. If you don't believe me, go play through a PV Classic tube amplifier. It is powered with EL84s, and it is just an absolutely brilliant freaking little combo. Sounds magnificent. And if you're into that clean thing, if you want a good bluesy amp, man, that PV Classic 50 is fantastic for that. So I could get really good clean sounds out of it. The problem is the distortion sound. Now, what's going on here, and I'm assuming it was because of the way they had the diodes in the amp. When you cranked up the distortion, it got very fizzy sounding. And it was fizzy like the Crank Crankenstein that Dimebag Darrell played. Now, Dimebag Darrell was a monster player, but I never liked his tone because it has that high-end sizzle on it. And just to me, that's a very harsh sound to my ears. And this had that high-end sizzle, and I could not dial that out to save my life. So what I ended up doing is I ended up replacing all the EL84s. I went with all different tubes in it, and I ended up replacing the 12AX7s too. Now, it did dial out about 50% of that fizz, but as you know as a guitar player, when you have a tone in your head, you will do everything you can to try to get as close as you can to that tone, and I simply couldn't get there with that amp. The concept was absolutely brilliant. Brilliant. The package was brilliant. Everything about it. I loved everything about that amp. Had it not been, and I'm pretty sure, like I said, it's got to be the diodes in it, because usually the diodes are what give you that sizzle on top. But I believe had it been like an EL34 amp with maybe, a little bit of adjustment on the wiring, that amp would have been absolutely miraculous. And I'd have probably been playing that amp today. But because I couldn't just get every bit of that sizzle out of it. Even if I could have got it down to 10%, I'd have been okay. But I could never get it below 50% on the sizzle. So lo and behold, that amp had to go. That is right. This is without a doubt one of the worst amps I've ever bought in my life. And out of every amp I've ever owned, I liked this one the least. I actually liked my Pod Pro, my original Pod Pro, better than the Mesa Boogie triple rectifier. So how did I end up with this? And it was a full stack, by the way. So how did I end up with this? Well, at Guitar Center, I had sold my last amp, and which was my Marshall JVM. And I only sold my Marshall JVM simply because I could never get that true Marshall tone out of that amp. And if you listen to Marshalls, the JVM has its own flavor. I could not quite get that pure Marshall tone out of it. And I dialed it and twisted it and tweaked it, and I had a beautiful rack effect. I mean, all my effects back then were all rack. And it was absolutely amazing. And I love the amp, but there again, I was trying, when I bought it, it's kind of one of those things, you play it in the store and you're like, holy shit, this thing's amazing. Then you get it home and you're like, holy shit, this thing's horrible. It was one of those scenarios for me. Now, I did gig with it for probably 2 years, and I really did like the amp, but it just never had that particular sound I was trying to go after. And if I tried to get that really good, heavy saturation out of it, that JVM just turned into mud. It just turned into pure mud. And if you don't believe me, get one and crank it. And that was kind of a problem. After I got the JVM, I actually started reading a lot of stuff about them, and I read a lot of stuff about that. People getting those JVMs and, just getting a very muddy, dirty, grungy sound out of it. And, of course, you could mod them and make them fantastic. But I didn't want to spend all that money on a JVM to turn right around and have to spend more money on modding it. I would rather just get rid of it and get a new amp. But I did play that for a couple of years, and I actually ended up selling it. I did very well selling it. I didn't lose very much money at all. I got my money's worth out of that JVM. But so when I got rid of that, I had ordered a crank Revolution because I had played a crank Revolution, and believe it or not, that was more of that true rock and roll, heavy rock and roll Marshall tone that I was after. I was getting out of the crank more than I was getting out of the Marshall JVM. Go figure. So I ordered a crank Revolution from Guitar Center, and the amp shows up. I go up there, I pick it up. It's in the box still. I take it home, rip, not even paying a bit of attention. And, because I've already got the amp sitting flat. I've already set it up, ripped it up, plug it in, nothing happens. Nothing. Oh, what the shit? No sound, no nothing. And so I'm like, what the hell, man? So I'm sitting on top of my cab because at this point I'm running my Marshall 1960 4x12. So I spin it around, and apparently the great guys at UPS had dropped that amp on its side, and it completely ripped the transformer loose from everything. And the transformer was just sitting in there, attached to nothing, ripped out of the cab, the whole 9 yards. And I was like, oh, you got to be kidding me. So I have to throw it back in the box. This is on a Wednesday. I haul ass back down to Guitar Center because I have a show at a pretty big venue that Friday night. And I had planned everything. I knew I could get it on Wednesday. I had messed with the Crank Revolution before. I knew I could get it dialed in pretty close to what I needed with my current rack effects setup. And I could have it ready by that show Friday night. I already knew I could do that. But not with a transformer ripped out of it. Power supply completely ripped out of it. And so anyway, I take it back, and they have no amps. I mean, they've got amps, but they have nothing that I want. And I thought, okay, well, for a quick replacement, I'll just grab a Mesa Boogie dual rectifier. Amazingly enough, they did not have a dual rectifier. Now, what they had down there is they had, some ignators and shit like that. And they had another Marshall JVM, I believe maybe a Marshall 800, which I did not want an 800. I have my own reasons for that. So before anybody gets on my ass about the Marshall tone, I have my reasons for not wanting the 800. And but they had a Mesa Boogie triple rectifier. Now, I had played a dozen dual rectifiers, and I really liked the dual rectifier, and but they didn't have one, and I was like, well, shit, I guess I'll just take the Mesa Boogie triple rectifier. I mean, because I already had the cash from selling all my other stuff, so I bought a full stack Mesa Boogie triple rectifier, and took it home, hooked everything up, and I started tweaking, dialing, and I could not get my sound out of that to save my life. Now, granted, before anybody says, well, that's because you're going after the Marshall sound, and that's a Mesa Boogie, I don't give a shit what it is. The flavors are different on the amps. The distortion and everything, you can still get the sound you're after. The only thing that's going to change is the flavor of the amp, the flavor of the color of the distortion, and the overall sound of the amp. But I can still get a tone that is usable out of any amp in this world, providing it's a good amp. Doesn't matter what it is. So, with that being said, I was like, well, hell, we got a show to play. This is the best I can get it right now. And so I took it to the show. And the whole show, I was just so disappointed in my sound. So disappointed. And I'm going to tell you how bad it was. When the show was over, the rest of my bandmates come up to me and they said, listen, no matter what happens, don't ever bring that amp back to a show again. Dude, that is the worst you've ever sounded. And I agreed. It was absolutely terrible. I could not find that happy spot on that Marshall. And it's like when you click the diodes on the triple rectifier, when you click on the diodes, you get that sizzle. You're right back to that Frankenstein sound again. And that's the one distortion sound I absolutely despise, is that sizzle. I like a nice, smooth distortion. But when you turn the diodes off, now all of a sudden, it just didn't seem to have enough ass in it. There was no balls in the amp. And I mean, I could crank it all the way up, and it just never quite got to where I needed it to be. And it's like it just had that one spot missing between the diodes on and the diodes off. And I switched it to all the different modes, modern, classic, and all that. And I could just never find that magic spot. And so, needless to say, I boxed that thing back up on Saturday, took that shit back to Guitar Center. I was done. I was absolutely done. And with that, didn't want that anymore. And so is that the one? I think that's when I ended up buying my, don't hold me to that, because I kind of got the amps. I'm kind of getting, no, that's when I bought my Randall RM100. Now, that is literally one of the best amps I've ever had in my life. That was amazing. And if I didn't mind lugging that big-ass gear around, I would still be playing with that amp more than likely, because it was just absolutely amazing. And I had 4 of the different modules, like the Synergy uses. I had 4 of the modules, and I actually had one of the modules. I had the EVH module, the brown one, which is the one I got Randall sued over, because it literally sounded just like the second channel on a 5153. You couldn't tell a difference. And Fender ended up suing Randall over that mod. And actually, they made like 150 got out, and I had one of those mods. It was freaking awesome. It's called the Brown mod, and it was absolutely awesome. Now, this one, had I put these in order, this probably would have been number 1, 2, or 3. And I'm going to tell you right now, the only good sound a Boss Metal Zone takes is when you take it outside and sling it into a dumpster, and you hear that fantastic sound of it smashing against the metal inside the dumpster. That's the best tone you'll ever get out of a Metal Zone. Back when I was doing my whole tone thing, again, I used to have an amp that had a clean and a distortion channel. That was it. And I wanted something with a boost on it and just a touch more gain. And so I, thought, well, I'll get a distortion pedal. That's what Randy Rhoads did. Had a distortion pedal. He used a TS9. And I didn't want to use a TS9 or a TS8. I didn't want to use the Ibanez, because it seems like everybody and their mother had a TS8 or TS9 back in that day. And I wanted something a little different. So lo and behold, through all my stupidity, I went out and bought a Metal Zone. And I got to tell you, man, they should call that a turd zone, because that is literally, without a doubt, the most useless pedal I've ever seen in my life. There's no good sounds out of it. There's no good distortion out of it. It doesn't matter what you do to a Metal Zone, it does not work. It is just an unruly box of garbage inside there. And, I was trying to use it as a boost originally, and so I had my rhythm, what I'd set down my distortion channel down to my rhythm channel, and then when I clicked that on for lead, dude, it just broke loose, and it made all kinds of freaking sounds. The noise was unbelievable. The distortion was completely unwieldy, and it just sounded absolutely trash. That was the trash zone. That's what they should call that pedal, the trash zone. So if you have a metal zone, literally the best thing you can do for your sound is to burn the metal zone, because that thing is absolute garbage. And I spent, I don't know, 100, 120 bucks on it back then, something like that. And it's not worth $2. It really wasn't. And I got to be honest, I don't even know what happened to that pedal. I didn't sell it. I didn't give it away because I wouldn't wish that bad mojo on anybody else. So I think it just finally obliterated. I think it just rusted itself away. Because I'm sure I did something like throw it under my house in a very damp, wet crawl space and just let it die a slow, miserable death down there. So that was number 3, and that easily could have been 1, 2, or 3, because that pedal is absolute garbage. Before I got into my Ibanez phase, I've been playing EVH guitars for 20 years. And if you've seen my channel, you've seen my 1996 pre-patent EVH PV Wolfgang that I absolutely love, Tobacco Burst, beat to hell and back. I mean, that guitar has seen it all. And it's just an amazing guitar. And, but, I would go out and play these huge shows, when you're playing, in cover bands and all that stuff, because we play for fun. We've never, we're going to be rock stars. Yeah, that was never my dream. I just wanted to go out and just have a great time and play a lot of cool venues with a lot of great musicians, and that's what I did. But we'd go out and play these shows, and then the next morning I get up and I have this massive black bruise because I wear my guitars kind of high, and where the binding would just dig into my arm. I thought, man, I gotta have something to give me some relief during a show. I'll still play my Wolfgangs mostly, but I gotta have something I can trade in and out with. And I really wanted to check out Ibanez's because I've never had an Ibanez guitar. And they came out with the Nita Jaundice guitar. They came out with the Nita Strauss, that blonde, space blonde, I think they call it. Got the EKG on the neck. And I thought, that's a badass looking guitar. It's an S series. I do like it. I'm going to buy that. And I got to tell you, absolute worst guitar I've ever bought in my life. It was absolute garbage. The good points about it is I do like the Pandemonium pickups, believe it or not. I thought they were very articulate pickups. I did like them. The bad part about it is pretty much everything else. The neck on that guitar, it just never felt premium to me. The neck always felt super cheap. And the frets, that was literally the worst fret job I've ever seen on a guitar in my life. It had crazy fret sprout on it, and the frets were 100% unpolished. I mean, you could see every scratch, every scuff, every mark on those frets. You could see it. And when you would bend a string, you could literally hear that. And I was like, this is completely unacceptable because that guitar was $1,600. And before anybody says, well, dude, all you got to do is polish the frets. No, I'm not going to pay $1,600 for a guitar. And then the very first thing I have to do before I play it is rip it apart and work on it. I'm not going to do that. That's like going out and buying a brand new car and then going home and ripping apart and fixing the car to make it run. That's idiotic. So I ended up sending that one back. And I got a second one. It was equally as bad. It had a ton of fret sprout on it. The frets were, again, completely unpolished. And on the second one, the nut, the locking nut on it was exceptionally high. There was so much room on that first fret, I could have probably slid my finger in between the fret and the strings. Absolutely terrible, which makes the guitar unplayable. And there again, you'll never get true intonation on it. It'll never happen. So I ended up sending that one back. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to try it one more time. So they sent me a third Nita Strauss Jiva, right back in the same boat. And I even told them, hey, this is the problem with the guitar. So they sent me a third one, and it had crazy fret sprout. The frets were absolute garbage, and this one had 2 frets that were not side by side, were low, which means on the E and B string, I had 2 very significant places that I had, just no sustain. It just instantly fret out, which means I was going to have that, and you can't really lift a fret. You don't want to file everything else down to match that fret because then you're just tearing up a lot of good frets. So you got to have that fret removed and you got to put another one in. And there again, I'm not doing that on a brand new guitar. And I actually did a video of that third one. I have a video. I have a review of the Nita Strauss. And I walk up to the camera, to the microphone, which at that time I was using my shotgun mic up there. And I went up there and I moved the string. And you can hear absolutely unacceptable. I have no idea how this guitar came out of that factory, because this is one of the Indonesian Ibanez's. Now, the bad thing about it is I wasted a lot of time screwing around with that Nita Strauss guitar. It was absolute crap. And for my first Ibanez, you know, I was like, okay, well, obviously Ibanez makes shit guitars. But the good thing about it is I thought, you know what, I'm going to try one more time. But I'm not getting a Jiva. I'm just going to get a regular S series, the one you all have seen on my channel, which is absolutely brilliant. It's an Indonesian guitar. It was $200-$300 less than the Nita Strauss. An absolutely fantastic guitar. I was shocked at the difference. And it has the stainless steel frets. The frets had no fret sprout, has stainless steel frets. They were like butter. Everything on this guitar was set up flawlessly. And because of that guitar, that turned into my RG 5320, which is the Cosmic Shadow, which you've seen on my channel. And that actually ended up causing me to get the 1120, which is the Indonesian version of the 5320, which actually is one of my main guitars. I play that guitar probably more than anything, which actually led me into buying my Red J Custom, which you've seen on my channel. I love Ibanez guitars. They just mix, you know, the Nita Strauss is just shit. It's just a garbage guitar. And I'm sure somebody out there somewhere's got a good one, but I had three, and all three were absolute trash. I think I paid $3,400 for this guitar. It was the Blue Jean, was the color, and it had the matching headstock on it. And everything I heard about these guitars were amazing, amazing, amazing. You know, Shure this, Shure that. Shure is making the best guitar in the world. You know, everybody, it seemed like everybody I saw on YouTube was playing a freaking Shure guitar. And I, well, shit, they got to be good. So I went down to our Shure dealer down here, and I played it, and I did like the guitar. I sat in there for about 30 minutes, and I played it, and I thought, okay, it's different. It's going to take me a minute to get adjusted to it. This was pre-Ibanez, by the way, before I bought the Ibanez's. It's going to take me a minute to get adjusted coming off my Wolfgangs, but I think I can. So I bought the Shure and went home, started playing it, you know, and of course, you know, had a band. So we're gigging, and there was just something about the guitar. I never connected to that, and I actually did a video on that. Do you connect to your guitar? And I never connected to that Shure. Now I'm sure Shure is a brilliant guitar. I'm sure it's a fantastic guitar, but that doesn't mean it's a fantastic guitar for everybody. You know, for me, it absolutely was not. But mine had some issues. And I was kind of shocked for what I paid for it, that it had issues. So after playing it, and I'd probably played it for about 3 or 4 months before I was finally like, oh my God, I've just had enough. My 13th fret was lower than all the rest of the frets. Now, again, unacceptable for $3,400. And being that it's stainless steel, there again, I couldn't level those frets down. That fret would have to be pulled and a new fret put in. So I thought, oh my God, you know, I guess I'm just going to have this fret pulled and have a new one put in. And I wasn't going to do it because that was before I even started really messing with guitars. And so lo and behold, I'm playing the guitar, and then I literally hear, and I'm like, what in the ass was that? And it sounded like a crack. So I flipped the guitar over, and sure enough, dude, this massive crack. Now, granted, it was just in the paint, but it was at the heel joint. And it was probably that long. It's probably 1.5 inches long. And I was like, what the hell's going on here, dude? This is a $3,400 guitar. And so I was like, that's it. I've had enough. So I took it back to the place that I bought it, the dealership, Jesus, the guitar store I bought it from. And he's like, yeah, dude. He's like, I've never, ever in my life seen this out of a Suhr guitar. And I was like, well, you know, you have now. So he's like, well, we got to send it back to Suhr. And I was like, fine. All right. 11 weeks goes by. Still don't have my guitar. 11 weeks for a $3,400 guitar that I had bought, and they still have it. 12th week had come up, and I was like, oh my God. I go down there, I'm like, dude, what the hell? Where the hell's my guitar? They contact Suhr. It's still waiting in line to be fixed. And I'm like, are you serious? This is not acceptable to me. This is not how this works. So luckily, the guy, the seller of the guitar store, luckily the guy's like, dude, I completely understand. This is not cool. You can go in there and get another Suhr, or I can just refund you your money. I was like, you know what? Just refund my money. Because I'm kind of one of those people, you know, once I have a bad taste in my mouth or something, I kind of get over it. The exception being was that damn Ibanez. I don't know why I was so hard-pressed to move through these Ibanez guitars, and I'm glad I did, because that ended up being one of my mainstay guitars now is my Ibanez. And I actually play my Indonesian, my 1120. I probably play that 80% of the time now because the guitar is just absolutely brilliant. It was the one year they made it, I think it was 2020, that they didn't put a tone knob on it. They moved the volume knob out of the way. Obviously, it's got the Edge Zero 2, I believe, is on that one. Trim system on it, which I think is brilliant. It has the EVO gold frets, and it has the DiMarzio Fusion pickups, which a lot of people absolutely hate. I absolutely love. I love. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because the other problem I had on that Suhr, I believe that rear pickup's called an SSH Plus, and the front is a SSH. That front pickup was one of the most wooden, no character, no warmth sounded pickups I ever had in my life. I absolutely despised the front pickup in that Suhr. Now, that SSH in the rear, I really liked. I thought it was a very good pickup. And I know a lot of people who love that SSH in the front. But I'm also comparing it to my PV Wolfgang, which in my ears, because everybody hears everything different. It's very subjective. In my ears, that is without a doubt the best sounding front pickup I've ever had in my life. It is creamy, buttery, smooth, and you get great tones out of it. And I was comparing that to that Suhr. And the Suhr, just no comparison between the two. The EVH just sounded worlds better when you're soloing on the front. So that was my other big issue with it. And I thought, man, $3,400, and I'm already going to have to replace the pickups. I've already got frets that are, that are not even in the right damn spot. They're too low, and now I got a crack in the hill. And that kind of did it for me on Suhr. Because, and here's the thing about the Ibanez, all right, before anybody says anything. The Ibanez was $1,500. The Suhr was $3,400. If I had to do, a little tweaking on the Ibanez, I really didn't want to do that on a new guitar, but I kind of understand. I don't understand that on a $3,400 guitar. Now, here's the current problem I have with Suhr. That guitar now, I believe, is like $38.99, and that is without the matching headstock. That's an extra $400 now. What came on mine for $34.99, and to me, that is absolutely unacceptable in every way, shape, and form. That's unacceptable. There's nothing on that guitar worth $4,000. Nothing. And I'm sorry, I feel that way about all guitars. There's nothing on them worth $4,000, $5,000, $6,000. There's nothing on that guitar worth that. That wood did not cost that. Those electronics did not cost that. And I don't give a shit. The labor did not cost that. That is them selling those guitars and putting a 400% markup on them. And unfortunately, we're dumb enough to buy them. So that's why I put a cap on my guitars now. I will not spend over $2,000 on a guitar, period. I will not do it. That is my cap. I will not go over that. The J Custom, yes, that was over $2,000, but let me tell you why I wanted that. Because I wanted something different that I knew I wasn't going to play a whole lot. I love that J Custom. I love the look at it. And that was more of a collector's thing for me because that guitar is a very hard color to come by. And what I was going to say before I dived into that, now, if you're a collector and you're paying, $8,000, $9,000 for these ultra beautiful PRSs, I get that. What I don't get is paying $8,000, $9,000 for it to put it on a stage and beat the living shit out of it. I can't do that anymore because all guitars on a stage get beat up, and that's why I have a $2,000 cap at this point. My J Custom's only been on the stage 4 times in its whole life since I've had it. That's it. And when I put it on there, I play maybe 1 or 2 songs on it, and then I go back to my 1120 and my Wolfgang. So those are the absolute 10 worst pieces of gear, guitars, amps, and effects that I have ever owned in my life. And, kind of disappointing. And I could probably make this list at 30 long, but I just went down to 10, to the absolute 10 worst. So I'm going to wrap this video right there. If you have any questions or comments, please leave it down in the comments section. If there's a particular piece of gear that you have that you just think's absolute crap, if you want to drop me a line and let me know, that'd be cool. Because I'm kind of curious to see what other people got. Because I always want to hear what other people's opinions are on specific gear. Because everybody's opinion varies greatly. And it kind of gives me an idea of what's going on out there. You buy something that you absolutely love and I hate it. Why did I hate it? And then I kind of, okay, now I got to figure out why I hated it so much if you love it so much. So just kind of interesting to me. So I'm going to wrap it up right there. And on that note, like the great Sammy Hagar says, if you miss the beat, you lose the rhythm and nothing falls into place. And no matter what you do, for the love of God, rock on.